Welcome to Versus, where we answer simple questions with 10 more questions. Thanks for joining us, everybody. My name is Colin Sandberg, coach at the Endurance Collective. I'm here, as always, with Ben Turretz, coach and founder of the Endurance Collective. And today we have a couple of very special guests. We're going to be talking about indoor racing, specifically Zwift racing versus IRL racing, outdoor racing. And we have with us professional cyclist Stephen Vogel from Project Echelon and Zwift racer, current US National Zwift Champion, Holden Comeau from the Saris Pros Closet team. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Yeah, great to be here.
Well, excellent to be here. Thanks, Colin.
So during the pandemic, a lot of IRL races were canceled, and I think it's fair to say there was a boom in virtual racing. A lot of people tried it out. Some people really took to it, others did not. Others felt frustrated by it and in some ways. And I also noticed with some of the more traditional lists, there was a little bit of, I think it's fair to say, maybe a backlash against Zwift racing. Stephen, I'll start with you. Why do you think that was?
I think that, cycling in general draws a lot of strong personalities, because I think it's a sport that really, you kind of need a certain amount of, not even necessarily ego, but you need a certain character in order to even, I think, stick with it to a point where you can train and race in any scenario. And there's a lot of nuance to so many things about cycling that I think people tend to kind of want to form camps, really, to just kind of, I'd say, establish their viewpoint and their role in order to just kind of find a niche in the sport. So I think that when a lot of that traditional stuff that we all think of with real life racing went out the window, that there was kind of a natural tendency to form camps and open up lines of discussion for some folks more intense than others about what is racing and what isn't racing. So I think the background of bike races in general kind of lends itself to some of that divide.
Do you think the current tribalism in our society fit into that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the not to get too far into just the social fabric, but I think in the age of social media as well, you can impulsively or not put out so much for somebody to see, in a constant stream, that it really helps, for better or for worse, kind of create maybe even more of a divide than would have been the case if you couldn't spread all these opinions so quickly about something really on the face value as simple as, indoor versus outdoor racing. So
Yeah. Holden, I'll kind of give you the flip side of that question. What attracted you to indoor racing?
That's a good question. I think that I have something to say about the follow up on the last question.
Oh, yeah,
as well. I think what attracted me initially was just that it fit my lifestyle so well. I sort of accidentally fell into this position, and it wasn't intentional. I didn't set out to be like Zwift National Champion. I didn't even know the National Championships was a thing when I started racing.
I just accidentally became National Champion.
Well, it sort of felt that way, because Colin and I have known each other for a long time, and we first met, over a decade ago, maybe even two. Yeah. It's been a while. But I was a professional triathlete back then, and thought I'd retired from that, thinking that I was not an athlete anymore. And in fact, when I stopped racing triathlon, the piece that was most difficult for me, I'd been a lifelong swimmer, so I was sort of ready to be done swimming. Running was still kind of interesting to me, and I felt like I could like keep on running throughout the rest of my life, just casually. But the piece that really was most painful about retiring from triathlon was knowing that I had this strong sense that I'd never be that strong on the bike again. So I'd gotten pretty good on the bike. But, sort of let all that go, started my company, Silverline Analytics Company, and became kind of a technologist. And it was from that perspective. I had an interest from a technological standpoint in what was happening with Zwift. And that's really how I started riding. I was staying fit for 10 years just by running, but then started Zwifting in the winter because I don't like to ride and go outside and be cold. So it was riding and Zwifted, but then just quickly became hooked. And it's funny, on a mutual friend of ours, Sarah Webster, on the first Zwift Nationals race was like 2018, and I joined it, wasn't very fit, had only been Zwifting for a couple months in the winter prior to that. And I immediately got dropped. It went up the volcano. And it was like 2 laps on the volcano. I immediately got dropped on the first lap, and it just pissed me off. And I texted Sarah, Colin. It was like, I'm coming back next year and I'm going to win this national championship. And then I did. But it's been just like, I was sort of joking about that, and I just wouldn't have expected it, but it just all sort of fell into my lap, I guess. And I mean, I didn't even know I was a sprinter. That's why I've had success on Zwift. I never sprinted on a bike when I was lawn training, So I think it was just like a combination of things. I was interested from a technological standpoint. I was able to find like a new athletic direction that I had never recognized before. It's like I wasn't coming to esports with like any like baggage that I hadn't been racing my bike outdoors ever. It was like all brand new. I didn't even know I was a sprinter, and it just was like really interesting to go down that route of discovering something new about myself as an athlete, and a lifelong athlete. So that sort of uncovering of something unique is great. And I was good at it. I was winning a bunch of races, so it was easy to just keep on getting more and more involved. To that other point, I wanted to comment on that. I think that, this past year with COVID has just been wild. It's like in the progress we've seen on the racing front just in this last year has gone. It's just been like such a hockey stick kind of growth, not just in the number of people racing, but just the talent pool and how hard the racing has gotten has really increased. I think when it first started, I think there was like a misconception that Zwift racing was an alternative to road racing, and in that you could just come on Zwift and it was supposed to be like replicating road racing. And I haven't done a lot of road racing, but I just don't think that's true. It's like a completely different skill set. I think there's tactically some strategy that can transfer over, but definitely like physiologically speaking, I think it's that there's success on the road versus success on Zwift. I think there's just not a lot of crossover between the two. It's just a very new discipline. I think the misconception early on was that that difference didn't exist. And I think that's starting to come around now, people recognizing just how different the two disciplines are.
Holden, do you feel like there is a physiological difference between the types of athletes that might be successful at Zwift versus racing in the real world, or do they draw from each other? Does one feed the other better? I come from the mountain bike world where typically a mountain, there was a lot of transfer over from the mountain bike world into the road world when I was flaming out as a mountain bike racer. And some of those guys, Cadell Evans is a guy that comes to mind who was very successful in the road world. Is that a transferable skill?
Maybe. I think that, again, I don't have a ton of like road racing experience. I used to ride around like the fast group rides with Colin back in the day around Philly, but I haven't really done any road racing. But you know, I'm a fan and I know sort of what's going on. I think that from my perspective, most of the like the successful riders on Zwift tend to be really punchy and really strong, and being good at like a 1 minute power up to 5 minute power, and then having a great sprint it really comes in handy. I guess I always felt as though like, especially when I was training for triathlon, everything was focused around functional threshold training and being strong at like 20 minutes and above. I feel like that might be more descriptive of like the more majority of road cyclists. On Zwift, I think it's different. It's more like a punchy power climber with lots of muscle.
That's weird, because I was almost going to say the opposite in my experience. Of course, that might mean I'm doing it wrong. But I feel like when I do a Zwift race, it never gets easy. And like even sitting in, I'm at 300 watts just in the pack versus, and there's surges certainly, but because you're going so hard all of the time, it's not quite at the level like you'd see in a crit, where you're soft pedaling or coasting a lot of the time, and then, you know, every corner doing 600 watts out of, but maybe
Yeah.
I'm doing it wrong.
I would, so that's like, I would say that I don't think you're not necessarily doing it wrong, but that's the skill to learn. You know, that that's how when you ride a lot, you develop some efficiency. And if you can't sit in a pack without recovering, then you need more practice on those skills, because it's definitely possible. And Zwift just made a recent update to their draft algorithm, like just happened very recently, and it's even easier now. It rewards like people who know how to navigate around in the pack, and sort of turn the power off. That's definitely my approach to every race. I'm trying to do as little work as possible, just be as efficient as I can be. And there's a ton of skill that goes into that for sure. Yeah, I like to look at, you know, we're sort of data geeks because all the data is around. We like dual record our races and everything to verify. But I always feel like it's a victory if I perform well. Just yesterday, I won a race. I won a sprint against like 5 or 6 other top sprinters, and I had one of the lowest, like 5-second, 15-second power to weight outputs of everyone, of all the other sprinters, which means that I was using like my tactical skills to win the race.
And that often is the case in real life races too, where the people who are there at the sprints have the lowest power. I mean, I remember on my old team, our team sprinter he would, you know, win the race, win the sprint, and his average power would be like 100 watts lower than mine in the race that I finished 37th place. Now, of course, I was making sure to keep him up there, maybe leading him out at the end. Stephen, what's your experience? Have you used Zwift? I know we're friends on Strava. I don't think I've ever seen you do an indoor ride.
Yeah, you know, I've done Zwift before. I have never actually done a Zwift race. I have a lot of teammates who have, and have heard varying stories about the experiences with it. I have one teammate in particular who's done very well on Zwift, and that's been awesome to see. You know, this is primarily about Zwift today. We as Project Echelon have partnered up with another platform that is worth another podcast, I think, just comparing the two, called RGT, which does attempt to bridge a little bit more of that real road feel, but still is very much in the virtual world. So I think to Holden's point, I think the crux maybe of what a lot of cyclists who have had a road racing background get into when they get frustrated with Zwift is that they maybe assume that their however many years of experience learning how to ride in a pack, how to, be efficient in a road race, they maybe assume that that is going to transfer over to a Zwift race in the same way. But the more I've heard teammates talk about Zwift and in my minimal experience using it, I think it's really important to emphasize that that skill set is probably, it's very much its own repertoire that you have to build, much as you would road racing experience. And I think to try to replace one with the other and say, oh, I should be doing well on this is going to be, definitely a shortcoming of any Zwift success. So, although I don't have a lot of personal experience, but that's kind of the gist I get with what can come up for people who think they can, suddenly jump into a Zwift race and knock it out of the park because they've done well in road race.
Do you guys, I guess this is for both of you, but do you feel there is a use for Zwift as an off-season training tool for racers? From a coaching standpoint, I have to be very cautious with what I allow some of my more elite athletes to do in the off season with Zwift. But, things like cyclocross and, off season types of racing always seem to be pretty popular with guys who do road seasons. I've seen a little bit of my clients trying to get into 8-week, 12-week Zwift racing leagues to sub for their intensity. And for some people it works, and for some people it's been kind of a disaster because it's just overcooks them and they get into the competitiveness of it. But what do you guys think about it? Stephen, as somebody who's racing on the road, do you feel like that would be detrimental to your training? Would your coach let you do that?
My coach wouldn't. I think, but again, I think that comes down to really what the coach and athlete relationship is as far as building out their road season. I think if it really is coming down to, okay, I need some amount of intensity, or okay, you as the athlete need some amount of intensity, I think Zwift is honestly a really good option. I think the important thing is for an athlete like that is to remember that automatically assuming they're going to do well and then coming up short in that scenario shouldn't overwhelm them with an amount of stress that they would equate to like a big real road season race. I think getting trapped in that in the middle of January is going to be super detrimental to mental health overall and perspectives about the season. If you feel like, oh, I should be doing well and I need to drop a couple kilos and increase my watts per kilo, just because this isn't, we're all competitive, right? And I think if you, as an athlete who doesn't primarily virtual race, if you can look at it as a training opportunity, if you and your coach need to integrate some amount of intensity at that point, then I'd say it's probably worthwhile. But just to keep in mind the context of why you're using it that way is really important.
So the mental health aspect is something that, I think is very, very valuable thing that you touched on there. Is, for somebody like me who is not an experienced Zwift racer, and I dabbled in it this winter, and man, I took some ego hits, like thinking I would kick ass. And it didn't happen.
Right.
And I can certainly see how that would feed into somebody's IRL season in a very negative fashion.
I think you weren't the only one to take an ego hit. Didn't Vanderpool get dropped off of a Zwift race that he did like 5 miles in?
Was it by somebody who was like, at the same time watching Game of Thrones and drinking Mountain Dew?
Yeah, that was Holden. But I thought, in this last year, when all the racing was canceled, I was really finding myself as a coach encouraging a lot of people to give it a shot. And I know some people were reluctant to do that and maybe took an ego hit, but I thought, and yeah, it's a different type of physiological, profile that's going to succeed at this. It's a different skill set, as you guys have really talked about well. But I think, a skill that is necessary in almost any form of bike racing is being able to suffer and think at the same time. And so if you're trying to do this race and you're suffering like crazy, and at the same time, you're trying to process all of this data that's in front of you and learn this new sport, and figure that out, I think that's a valuable skill. That is tough to replicate if you don't have some form of racing.
I think that from a fitness standpoint, I think it's an exciting opportunity for coaches and sports scientists to look at what's happening with indoor training. Something's going on. I've got some background in coaching, and I kind of understand how to keep myself fit and help get other people fit and how to leverage those tools to success. I've been surprised. I've not experienced anything like this as an athlete. I feel as though sometimes it's like it was unintentional. The fitness and strength that I've gotten. I've never been this strong in my life. I've never been better. I was a swimmer, a triathlete, and I'm 43 years old, and it feels as though like the game did that to me. All I had to do was play, and I got fit. And I don't know how that might translate to if I were to go and try to race triathlon again, or to race my bike outside. But something happened, and it was sort of unintentional. I just raced a lot on Zwift, and I got stronger than I've ever been before. So something's going on there that I think needs to be studied in more depth to really start to understand how we can use the tool to benefit in more holistically as athletes. There's another component that I like sort of crossed my mind. The mental health piece I think is super important. On Zwift, I think it's important to remember that it's always a world-class field, right? It's not, when you're the access you have to competition in real life racing is typically more siloed. It's like you follow a more steady progression up to world class. It's like regional, national, world class, and that's sort of the progress you get there. Zwift is world class all the time. There's always the opportunity to have world class caliber talent in the race, and when you have athletes that are all coming together, even 5 or 6 like world class caliber athletes in a race can really have an impact, and it can make you work a lot harder than you wanted to. Over the past month or so, I sort of fell off my fitness a bit. It was the first time that I felt a little bit stuck in that my fitness was low, and the intensity of the races were so high that I couldn't even keep up anymore. And I kept getting dropped. So it was the first time I felt like I needed to actually go train to get myself more fit in order to get back into the race. Whereas up until this point, I never trained. I never did any workouts. I never did intervals. I just raced. Every time I got on Zwift, it was only racing.
And how many, sorry to interrupt you, but how many races would you say you do in an average week?
Like 4 or 5. And that's every ride is just a race. And I kind of monitor that if there's a time where I need to be working like my 5-minute power, then I'll pick races strategically to try to bring that out. For the most part, I could, my default effort was I could go to a race, sit in for 45 minutes at a fairly comfortable below threshold endurance pace, 3 watts per kilo or something, get some pretty good race, like endurance miles on my legs, and then just do a 15-second sprint on the end and hit some intensity. And that for a long time was enough to just keep me progressing. the racing has got to a point now where it's just gotten too fast. And because I'm not like on top of it and my fitness isn't even good enough to keep up, felt that I was scrambling and I had to sort of change the approach a little bit. But it's been an interesting progression, like how that has all come through and evolved. I think there's just still a lot more work to do. I don't know if it's even started to really understand how to use it to translate into success in real life.
I just want to follow up on one thing. Holden, I noticed when you talk about Zwift, you always call it a game. And I think that that's an interesting part of this, the gamification. And Ben and I talked about that a little bit in the last episode here, where we talked about indoor training and outdoor training, and how the gamification of it can be, I'll tell athletes, lean into that. If you want to, get a badge or something, if it helps you get your workout done, that's great. If it starts to interfere with your workout because you're trying to play the game and it's, you're supposed to be doing a recovery ride. It's the same thing with like Strava KOMs. People are like, oh, I was supposed to be doing a recovery ride, but up on your computer pops, you're 10 seconds behind the KOM, so I might as well go for it. But I think that's an interesting part of this. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more, if that was an appeal for you. I mean, I think you used to play some video games back in college, right?
Yeah, I was a James Bond GoldenEye.
Oh yeah,
back in the
N64.
Yeah. I think the gamification piece was definitely part of the appeal for me. I've always enjoyed playing video games, and it's definitely a video game, and that's important to understand. And there's, anyone with experience playing a video game can appreciate and understand that, to get better at video games, you almost sort of like, it almost feels like you're hacking it. You learn these little tricks on like how to accomplish certain tasks in a video game, and much of the way that you learn those tasks is through repetition. You just keep doing them over and over again until you like perfect these certain moves. I like an example is in James Bond in GoldenEye. I don't know if you guys have ever played this, but in GoldenEye, when you killed your opponent, the opponent was then respawned in a certain location, and the location was always the same. There's always the same pattern depending on what world you're in. And there are certain worlds where if you knew the spawning pattern, you could just run around and keep killing someone the moment they respawn in the game. So it was like this advantage where if you were perfect, you had enough experience to know where the person was going to be born into the game, you could just run around and sort of cheating, I guess, but it's not, because it's the game. But you develop this mastery over the game that comes from repetition. And Zwift is no different. There's like understanding the course and how your avatar flows over the course, having like a sense of how speed is impacted. I honestly spend most of my time thinking about speed versus power. I'm always like, it's all about momentum and movement relative to others. And that is that to me is like an interesting piece of the gamification of why that's interesting to me. And there's those skills that are there that at first glance are just hard to recognize. We think the gamification is when you get like the power ups, but that really is just surface level gamification. It's more about like the nuances of how the physics work in the game. But when Strava came out, I fell into that. I started using Strava when I was still riding triathlon, and that was my sole motivation to go ride the bike, was go chase Strava KOMs on my TT bike.
I really wonder if we could ever correlate Strava and Zwift to people who are gamers, because I grew up not playing video games, and it was like I didn't have the attention span for it. Yeah. And Strava, yeah, there were a couple of Strava things that grabbed me during the pandemic out of boredom, but in general, Strava and Zwift, I was like, oh man, I wish I was outside right now, just, doing a mindless 4 hour ride, to nowhere in zone 2. And that's like, for me, it's almost like a mental health thing that I can't get that physical release, even if I'm working really hard inside, that I get outside. Especially if I'm riding on dirt. There's a mental engagement, and I kind of hear from you, Holden, that some of that might actually really transfer if I'm paying attention to momentum and the flow of the game. It almost seems like it would cross more over into how I'd think about riding mountain bikes. And understanding how this trail moves and understanding, what my body needs to do. Whereas road riding outside, it's you can kind of let your mind wander a little bit.
Yeah, I think I've definitely thought about that before. There's a guy on my team who's an avid mountain biker, and I've experienced it as well. The idea of flow in the game, and where you're really focused just on momentum, and you're just sort of in touch with the course and the other people around you. You definitely get that sensation. I don't think it's as I don't think it's like as meaningful as when you're outside doing that, because there's just more like stimulation. I think outdoors it's more absorbing, but there's definitely a sense of that in Zwift, and you can get there. I found that when I first started Zwift, like the first 2 years, I would inevitably stop after a couple months because I wanted to go run outdoors again, because I was Zwifting in the winter, running in the summer. And running was still my preferred exercise. It's before I got really competitive with Zwift. But I found that after a couple months on Zwift, I contrasted to running. Running put me at peace. I'd go for a run and feel great afterwards. Do a Zwift race and feel angry afterwards. And it's mostly because I was sprinting, but it was just like a power effort, and I would get like intense and really focused, versus running where I was just trying to be calm and find more of that flow. That's my experience. I guess now I've been able to, I think I've gotten like my competitiveness under control, and I don't get as worked up about the like Swift racing and people who are cheating, as and I'm just more about it all. But at first there was that, that's for sure.
Stephen, would you agree that road racing is a game too, though? IRL racing, I mean, there's a game, maybe it's not a digital game, not a video game, but it's still kind of a game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a huge compendium of skills you need to acquire to, race any type of race in real life well, and yeah, gamify it. I mean, in my own experience, and it's mirrored in so many other racers, you can oftentimes get stronger more quickly than you get better. In real life, I was always, for that first maybe 3 to 5 years of racing, I was always stronger than I was. I was a better. I mean, and maybe I was a stronger rider rather than racer. There's a nuance to understanding physics of a pack in any given course, whether it's a crit or a road race, and you need to obtain that skill set. And I think to say it's totally different from Zwift in that way would just kind of be a disservice to what you need in order to do well in real life too. I think ultimately any differences there come down to the medium of what you're experiencing. Obviously, I think mentally, being able to be drawn into the Zwift world and other platforms to the level that some people may only experience in real life. I personally lean a little bit more that way. I feel like I can't quite get that same amount of stimulation that I can in a real life race, nor have I done Zwift enough that I could begin to find some satisfaction in mastering those components of the virtual world. But yeah, to your question, to make sure we answer your point, there's definitely skill sets that you need as a road racer or any IRL racer that if you don't have, then you're just going to be suffering just as you would mashing through the Zwift course in a way that's pretty detrimental to success or enjoyment.
One of the things I always found too was that it's like each level you go up, the rules change a little bit, the game changes, and you have to learn that whole new thing. And Holden, you kind of mentioned that too, where maybe you were sitting in for a while the whole time and then putting in a huge 15-second sprint at the end and winning, and then maybe things changed, maybe the field got faster, but you had to change your tactics a bit. I was wondering actually, Stephen, if you found, or maybe if you had any examples of anything you found at a pro level in terms of playing that game that wasn't necessarily true as an amateur.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can fake it a fair bit up to a certain level in real life racing. I think you begin to realize that your matchbook, as we call it, it builds, and you have all these matches you can burn in a race, but at the same time, that level of competition and the effectiveness of those matches, I think, becomes less and less. You're not going to blow up a race by doing, by striking a match and, attacking or something when that curve of difficulty increases. And it didn't feel to me like it was a linear increase. It was more exponential as far as what you needed to do with your matches in a certain difficulty of race as you moved up. And yeah, so much the way that Holden maybe is feeling that he has to figure out how to recalibrate or train or learn around a new level of playing field. That was definitely apparent to me when I started racing more of the national level races, and it was hard. I mean, there were a couple seasons where I'd get dropped in big crits. I would barely hang on. I would question, what is it that I'm doing wrong about, or what am I not doing? But I think that circled back to just needing more time to really understand those nuances and how to be a good racer rather than just a strong rider.
So I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about cheating. And I hear so many people that say, I'm not going to do Zwift because everybody's a cheater, or everybody's lying about their weight or their power. So let's address a couple of those things. I definitely would say, I mean, I don't worry about this too much, but I do notice, I'm 170 pounds at 6'1", and I feel like I'll check the results if I do a Zwift race, and I'm like the heaviest guy by 5 kilos. And I'm like, I know I'm not the lightest guy in the world, but I'm not in like the top 0.1%. Am I?
I didn't even know you could really cheat. I don't know how yet. I got to figure that out.
Well, that's what we're going to learn today. Right. Now, but Holden, I mean, at your level, there's additional layers of verification for that, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. I was in the WADA testing pool. I got drug tested for the World Championships, and that was amazing. So once you get to a certain point, there's much a much greater degree of scrutiny that goes in, but that's not like, it's not currently the process to validate performances is not currently in a scalable place. So it's hard to apply that to the entire racing community. And to a degree, that's what we all really want. It's you know, it's what's exciting about esports, I think, and these platforms is that it's just open and it's accessible to everyone. And it can be frustrating sometimes when people who are clearly cheating are interfering with the race and influencing the race. But that typically sorts itself out. You know, there's occasionally something will happen where there's someone who's really screwing things up. But often in most races that I'm in, we just use the chat function and just talk and then call people out who are clearly not riding effectively. And often I think they might not even know. You know, we just encourage people who might be using Z power instead of, who don't have a power meter, and they're just riding by like algorithm. We'll just encourage them. We want people to keep on having fun and experiencing it, but we don't want them like chasing down breaks. You know, we just encourage them to stay in the pack, stay towards the back of the pack, and not influence the race as much. But the cheating's there. I think the entering weight. I mean, I'm a as your guy too. I'm almost always the heaviest guy in the race at 77 kilos. I don't know. We have to do live weigh-ins. We record ourselves on video for all the big races. Within a 2-hour window of the race start, we have to record ourselves weighing in. We have to dual record all of the races. So you have, and your smart trainer
Could you explain what dual recording is for people that might not know?
Yeah, sure. So you have to have 2 power meters, 2 power sources. One of them has to be a smart trainer, and that must be connected to the game. So that, and then you have to have an on-bike power meter, your choice, whatever that is, either crank-based or pedal-based, and you have to record that secondary power device to a separate head unit. And then after the race, so you've got basically 2 fit files of stored data. After the race, we submit that information and they're used for comparison purposes. And there's been a lot of high profile instances where people are trying to cheat and game that system, where they'll miscalibrate their trainer on purpose and then manipulate their secondary power file to try to get them to match up more even. It's kind of wild, the degree to that the extent that people are going to cheat. It kind of blows my mind that people
Right.
like the stakes just don't seem that high right now. But
Are there tens of dollars at stake, like in IRL bike racing?
I just got a check yesterday for $4,000.
Oh, it's more than pro bike racing.
It's I mean, so I've run the Saris the Pros Closet team is pretty exciting. I think we started the team right before 2019 Nationals, so it's 2019 February. But we've really worked hard to commercialize, you know, the opportunities. We've got a whole handful of really incredible sponsors that we're working with, and I think part of the value that we're bringing to those sponsors is that, you know, it's not just about the media reach that we bring, but we're also doing some business development work and strategically working with those brands to help them understand the Zwift ecosystem and how to engage, because the brands are trying to figure that out as well. So there's definitely some investment coming. Whenever, you know, there's brands who are investing in it, there's prize money that's coming. You know, it's no riders are getting paid cash aside from prize money, but we're getting a lot of product support, and I think it's growing. We just saw the Movistar team just did like a thing, and they've now got a pro esports squad that they're supporting, and I think there'll be more and more of that coming down the road. Right now, though, it was funny. There was a really early, like 2 years ago, there was a race series that came on, and they were paying mobs of money. They paid like $20,000 or something to the winner of like the series, to single rider, and they did that. They had like 3 seasons of that.
Do you think this is a zero-sum game with pro cycle, like IRL racing, or do you think the draw is from different areas in terms of like sponsorship and, you know, like if Movistar all of a sudden sees that their esports team is more successful and has more of a following, do they shrink their pro tour team?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's additive, and because it's different, and the value that's given back is a lot different. The business structure is completely different. You know, there's the costs of supporting an esports team are substantially lower. I did some work with the rally squad earlier in the summer, and when the virtual Tour de France was happening, and I was sort of advising their riders on how to ride on Zwift and bring them up the learning curve pretty quickly. And it wasn't the entire rally squad that was racing. It was a subset of riders who felt like we're going to have the most success. But around that same time, Rally was also fielding part of their squad in Europe somewhere in some races over there on like a 3-day race. And you look at the financial commitment there, it's like you've got half the squad racing in their basement, and then you've got another half of the squad who's got plane tickets and hotel rooms and support staff somewhere in Europe for a little race. And you contrast the media value that was returned, the ROI that they get out of that. It wasn't a big race in Europe. It was sort of like it was a supportive training race that they were all at. And they spent a lot to get there versus, what they got from the esports thing. I think it's different, a different ROI. And it's a different business, but I think it's additive, and it's definitely not gonna retract from in real life. I think it just gives the brands like something else to invest in. There's more there for them now.
I think this marketability side is a really interesting aspect of this. And personally, I find, watching a lot of this Zwift racing entertaining. I mean, the races are quick. And, so it's not like a huge time commitment, and all the data's there, which I think is really interesting. You can look at different angles, and a lot of the bigger races Dave Toll's done a lot of the announcing for it. In a way, I feel like, IRL racing could take some lessons from this in terms of marketing itself better, especially now. I mean, why can't we have more races where there's a drone over the race taking pictures, and everybody's got onboard bike cams and is sharing all of their data? Make this a little bit more marketable.
Yeah, they're definitely actually doing that quite a bit more. I think at least this season, maybe even the last couple, they've had some live onboard, GoPro style footage broadcasted. And riders are definitely being more transparent with, and they do show on the bike data as well, which is pretty cool at certain points in the races. So yeah, I don't know how much that's influenced by e-racing, but I feel like it must be a certain amount, because these two things are, the use of power meters and understanding power is becoming more popular. And then, yeah, the transparency of what you see, I mean, as long as it's true data in e-racing is really the draw of watching it and experiencing it as a viewer. So yeah, I think that's already happening in the at least at the World Tour level. But yeah, and I mean, looking ahead, you have Zwift as one of the primary sponsors for Legion of Los Angeles, which is the continental team that has, for the most part, I think, just a in real life calendar. So you're seeing, you're literally seeing the bridging of those two things, at least from a sponsorship perspective. So yeah, it's interesting to say the least. I'd say, and seeing how they influence each other is going to be pretty cool.
Holden, I want to go back to one thing you said. You and I are both 43, and it seems like there are a number of pretty successful guys in their 40s on Zwift, and in real life racing, it seems like the top pros are getting younger and younger at the very top. I mean, so many of these guys now seem like they're in their early 20s. I wonder if there's something about Zwift. Is it just that you can you don't have to travel, uh, or is it that, maybe our reflexes aren't as good, or we're afraid of getting hurt, injured?
For sure. For sure. And I'm glad that all the younger and younger talent are being attracted to outdoor riding, so they don't come in and make me hurt more than I already am. So I think that it really, Colin, is like it is it fits so well with my lifestyle. Got 2 kids, got a 9-year-old kid, a 3-year-old daughter, and I don't consider myself to be a professional athlete anymore. I run a business, and so I race before the kids wake up in the morning. I don't ride outdoors. I don't go for 3-hour, 4-hour, 5-hour outdoor rides on the weekends anymore. I do 1 hour of really intense Zwift racing in the morning before the kids are awake. It fits really well. I think, like, in general, my overall attitude, and you can appreciate this, Colin, I'm sure, because you're also 43. I've just gotten to the point where I think I took for granted what I was capable of doing when I was younger as an athlete, and I can't do that anymore. I feel like I'm on like borrowed time right now, and I'm just like really thankful all the time that I can still do this. That I'm actually been able to. There's this tool that's brought out something more in me that I was not expecting and didn't think I would ever have again. So it just is like a change in mindset now that I'm older. I'm just really happy. I'm contented with everything. I'm not striving for anything. When I was younger, I was always trying to get to the next level, and always, like, there was this angst that was like I was always carrying with me. And I don't have that anymore. It's just like I just have a ton of fun. Like, my teammates are awesome. They're all my friends. So it's just like a different mindset that I think is connected to being more mature, and just having this opportunity. It just is it's a totally different mindset, and I think that's connected. It has to be connected in at least in to some degree to finding actually that success. It's everything's all the same thing, and if I'm happy in my life and I'm strong with my life, then I'm going to be happy and strong as an athlete. So I don't know. I think maybe that's my take on the whole thing. I've got years of long endurance miles under my belt, and I've got a ton of efficiency that I've built up, and um, uh, who knows? I've fully have bought into, like, the idea that I'm having fun, and if that's what keeps me most motivated, I think that's why I continue to be successful, and that's really what it's all about for me.
And Stephen, kind of the flip side of that question, I mean, you're a little younger than we are, but you are, you're a doctor. You're doing your residency right now. Is that correct?
No, I'm past residency, actually.
Okay, sorry.
Full-fledged. No, it's all good. No problem.
So, I mean, you've got a quite a busy schedule too, I'm sure, and you probably work some crazy shifts. Do you ever find that that's a challenge, balancing that with your racing career?
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story every time I tell it. I didn't really start racing until I got into med school. I joined the collegiate team at Wake Forest out here in North Carolina. I'd always been a huge cycling fan and ridden just for the sake of riding throughout high school, but I really chose the worst time to start getting into to endurance training. But I think what defines me as a rider, in part, and how I relate to something like Zwift, is more like kind of what Ben was saying, that I felt like I kind of had to keep riding and getting better throughout the difficult times in med school and residency, even if it meant riding on 3 or 4 hours of sleep or riding at night, just finding that outlet to just get out and free myself from everything that I was dealing with, trying to be successful in a completely different world. So yeah, my story was all about kind of managing the ability to get better on my natural talent and then a work ethic around that. Finally having landed in a more flexible position, doing some telemedicine, even realizing the ability for me to increase, what Holden talked about with that endurance base to a whole nother level, has already shown itself as like kind of this world opening up in front of me. Even though, I'm not, I'm 10 years older than those new talents coming up. That's been an interesting dichotomy to where, to the point where I think I probably would have been a really good Zwift racer during residency because it is so efficient. And I think it's such a specified both duration and then power profile that you can train and adapt, right? Or you can improve. Whereas the reality of, pro level road racing, and even the level of endurance you need for a long crit race, you can get by with that specified, 1 to 2 hours with a lot of intensity, but that water level that you need to float on in order to repeat that over a stage race of 3 to 5 hours, each day, if you want to be successful there, then you really do need that extra time commitment to build up that base level of endurance. And circling back to the point of, older guys or middle-aged guys really finding success, especially if they've been an endurance racer. I mean, it takes a lot longer to build that lasting base fitness than I think people sometimes realize, that those mitochondrial changes, everything that you can adapt on a cellular level, that does last. I mean, and it takes a while to do that. So if you've been a triathlete or, ultra runner or something like that, and then later in life start to build up this intensity and very specific training and find satisfaction in that, I think it's absolutely the recipe for some success. But my story with that was that I had to manage outdoor racing and outdoor training with such a time crunch, and now I'm kind of opened up to being able to train like a pro, which is pretty neat.
Nice. So we normally end these episodes by throwing in a little fun bonus question. Today, bonus question: riding with headphones or training with headphones? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Definitely. To the detriment of my road safety. I've actually recently been gifted. My wife gave me a rear view mirror that I put on my drop bar. So I officially have, earned that badge of safety over looking pro. But when you can almost only train like I do with constant music in your ears, then being able to glance down and look behind you is pretty cool out on the road. So pretty much always headphones. Yeah,
I actually I think I never ride with headphones if I'm riding with other people.
Right.
But by myself, if I'm doing an easy ride, I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks.
You're a hardcore history guy, right?
I'm about 50 hours into Obama's biography, and I've got about 40 hours to go.
See, that's so interesting, because even when I am like cruising on a recovery ride, I need some intensity to the music that I'm listening to. I just find myself like getting so distracted with the podcast that I kind of like zone out and don't even want to like put out effort.
I listen to music if I'm doing a hard workout now, but
Sure.
I know, safety aside, there's also some people who will say, like, you got to concentrate on the task at hand, especially if it's a race. I mean, how about you, Holden? Do you listen to music when you're racing?
So I blow through a lot of headphones because we sweat so much, and there's been times where like if my headphones stop working, I just don't ride. it's that important. Like I need to have them. In fact, I've got certain songs, like sprint songs, that I queue up on my Spotify playlist when it's time to sprint.
Yeah.
It's really like it's a critical component.
Can I ask what your sprint song is, or is that
super
like
embarrassing?
It's
so
trade
embarrassing.
Final countdown?
No, it's the 1812 overture. It's
Wow,
classic music.
Sousa.
Yeah, with like the cannons firing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well,
The more nerdy part is that I would probably listen to the techno version of that song in order to get
Right.
it works.
okay. I guess you can't argue with what works.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was really fun. I feel like we got a lot of good information from you guys, and thanks for bearing with us. Hopefully, you'll join us again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for
Thanks.
having us. Good to chat with you guys.
Yeah.
Likewise.